The vineyard was quiet that morning. Rows of grapevines stood still under the sun, years of work, patience, and money rooted in that soil. Then the SUVs rolled in. 2 black HOA vehicles crossed my gate like they owned the place. A man in a pressed uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand, already smirking. By order of the HOA, he said loudly, "This vineyard is in violation of community standards." I laughed. I thought he was joking. "This land isn't part of your HOA," I said. "You have no authority here." He didn't laugh back. "Oh, you're mistaken," he replied. "Everyone around here answers to us now." He pointed at my vines like they were trash. Claimed they were an eyesore. Said neighbors complained about smell and noise. Then came the threat, daily fines, forced shutdown, and possible seizure if I didn't comply. I asked one simple question. "Show me where it says you control my property." That's when the HOA president stepped forward. Calm. Confident. Dangerous. "You can fight us," she said, "but the court always sides with the HOA." She was wrong. Because in that moment, standing in my own vineyard while strangers tried to control it, I realized something. They didn't just cross a boundary. They made a mistake so big it would destroy their power forever. Before we continue, drop your city or state in the comments. I want to see how far this message reaches. And if you stand with truth over intimidation, hit like and subscribe. This channel exists to expose abuse and make sure justice is heard. That vineyard didn't appear overnight. It wasn't some weekend hobby or vanity project. It was the result of years of planning, saving, and taking risks most people were too afraid to touch. Every row of vines was planted by hand. Every irrigation line, every fence post, every patch of soil had a story behind it. I bought the land long before the nearby houses existed. Back then, it was quiet country property, zoned agricultural, approved by the county, and clearly marked on every official map. I didn't sneak around loopholes. I did everything by the book. Deeds filed. Taxes paid. Permits approved. No shortcuts. The vineyard became my livelihood. Harvest seasons were brutal, slow, and unforgiving, but they were honest. You wake up early, work until your hands ache, and trust that patience will pay off. That land wasn't just property. It was proof that discipline and time still meant something. Years later, developers arrived. New roads. New houses. Perfect lawns and identical mailboxes. Eventually, an HOA followed. They built their community near my land, not on it. Their boundaries were clear. Mine were, too. There was never confusion. Until suddenly, there was. At first, I didn't pay them much attention. I didn't attend their meetings. Didn't care about their rules. Didn't complain when residents stared or whispered. My vineyard had been there before them, and it would be there after. Or so I thought. Because what started as quiet disapproval turned into entitlement. And entitlement turned into authority they didn't actually have. Somewhere along the way, the HOA convinced themselves that proximity meant ownership. That paperwork could be rewritten by confidence. That silence meant surrender. They didn't see a vineyard built on legal ground and years of sacrifice. They saw land they wanted to control. And they assumed I wouldn't fight back. The first notice showed up without warning. No phone call. No conversation. Just a bright orange paper taped to my gate like a parking ticket. Notice of violation, HOA compliance required. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time, trying to understand how an organization I didn't belong to was issuing me orders. They claimed the vineyard violated community appearance standards. Said the fencing didn't match neighborhood aesthetics. Complained about farm equipment being visible from the road. Even mentioned odor concerns, as if grapes growing in soil were some kind of public nuisance. At the bottom was a fine schedule. Daily penalties. Escalating fees. A deadline circled in red. I assumed it was a mistake. I called the number listed. A woman answered, polite, but distant. I explained that my property wasn't part of the HOA. She paused, then replied casually, "We'll verify that." The tone told me everything. They weren't asking. They were deciding. A week later, another notice appeared. Then another. Each one more aggressive than the last. The language shifted from request to demand. From compliance encouraged to enforcement imminent. That's when the HOA president came in person. She didn't knock. She walked straight through my gate with 2 men behind her, clipboards ready. She smiled like this was already over. "We've reviewed your case," she said. "Your operation doesn't align with the community's vision." I reminded her, again, that I wasn't part of her community. She tilted her head. "You're surrounded by us," she replied. "That makes this our concern." I asked where, exactly, her authority came from. She handed me a printed map. Lines highlighted in yellow. My land shaded just inside them. "This shows you're within our influence zone," she said confidently. Influence zone. That's when confusion turned into frustration. I pulled out my own documents, official county maps, zoning approvals, deeds with clear boundaries. I laid them on the hood of my truck. She barely glanced at them. "Our attorneys disagree," she said. "And if you refuse to comply, we'll proceed with enforcement." Enforcement meant more than fines. It meant liens. It meant blocking access roads. It meant warning vendors not to deliver. It meant turning my neighbors against me before I could explain anything. Within days, I felt it. Trucks hesitated at my gate. A supplier called asking if there was a legal issue. Someone reported me for noise during harvest, something I'd done for years without complaint. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was control. They weren't trying to resolve a misunderstanding. They were applying pressure. Testing how far they could push before I folded. Every notice, every visit, every threat carried the same unspoken message. This is bigger than you. They thought paperwork and confidence were enough to erase years of ownership. They assumed I'd panic. That I'd settle. That I'd comply just to make it stop. What they didn't realize was this. I was done explaining. And I was done asking. The calm patience I had clung to began to fray. The notices weren't just annoyances anymore, they were weapons. Fines piled up faster than I could track, each one with threats of legal action. But it wasn't the money that got under my skin, it was the principle. My vineyard was my life's work. My property. And now strangers were trying to dictate how I ran it. It started small. A security guard appeared one morning at my gate, asking for inspection permission. I told him firmly I didn't owe them access. He smiled, notebook in hand, as if my words were irrelevant. Days later, another guard parked along my driveway, photographing equipment, labeling it as violations. They were cataloging my life, piece by piece, as if ownership was determined by their clipboard. Then came the vendors. Deliveries were delayed, some refused outright. The HOA called suppliers, claiming my vineyard was illegal. A week later, a tractor delivery was turned away at the gate. My harvest was threatened, not by nature, not by disease, but by people who had no legal claim over me. Every day brought another obstacle, another humiliation. Neighbors began whispering. The HOA subtly pressured them, suggesting my vineyard caused problems for the community. A few curious onlookers became nervous witnesses, unsure if siding with me meant trouble. My reputation, built over years, was now under attack. Strangers who had never walked a vine row in their life were trying to control my land. Then the president herself returned. She strutted onto the property like she owned it. "We just want compliance," she said, voice calm but tone sharp, "or we'll take action to ensure the community standards are met." Action meant everything from fines to legal motions, to public shaming at HOA meetings. She waved a folder of what she claimed were violations, pictures of my vines, my barn, even my compost piles. I realized then that this wasn't about rules. This was about power. They weren't enforcing standards, they were testing how far they could push me, hoping fear would make me bend. I refused. Every time they tried to corner me, I stood firm. I showed up when they attempted inspections, always calm but defiant. Every visit ended with them retreating, temporarily, but their threats only escalated. Emails grew sharper, phone calls longer, warnings more frequent. And then came the line that made my blood boil. The HOA president, in a casual tone as if reading weather notes, said, "You're surrounded. Eventually, you'll have no choice but to comply. Everyone here answers to the HOA. The audacity. My property. My vineyard. My livelihood." They were trying to erase it with arrogance and intimidation. It was clear, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated assault on my rights, on my work, and on my pride. Every move they made was meant to humiliate, to wear me down, to break me. And that's when anger took over, not blind anger, but sharp, precise, burning anger. Because in that moment, I knew one thing: the more they tried to control me, the more they revealed their weakness. Authority without law is just audacity. And audacity can be exposed. From that point on, I stopped reacting in panic. I started documenting. Every threat. Every visit. Every insult. Every attempt to intimidate me became evidence. Their power was loud, but fragile. And I was about to show them exactly how fragile. After weeks of harassment, I realized yelling back or arguing on the spot wasn't going to work. Their confidence thrived on confrontation. Their power seemed unstoppable in the moment. So I decided to stop reacting. I stopped letting their threats dictate my emotions. Silence became my shield. I retreated to my office overlooking the vineyard. The land was calm, as if mocking the chaos the HOA tried to bring. I pulled out every document I had: deeds proving ownership, county zoning maps confirming agricultural designation, tax receipts, permits, letters from the local government, all evidence that I had done everything by the book. Every legal line, every signature, every stamp reinforced the truth: this vineyard was mine. Then came the HOA's notices, piled neatly on my desk like a challenge. I photographed each one, scanned every letter, saved every email. I documented every interaction: the security guards who tried to intimidate me, the suppliers who were blocked, even the whispered warnings from neighbors. Every piece of intimidation would become a thread in a legal tapestry showing their systematic abuse of power. Next, I called my lawyer. A seasoned attorney, someone who understood property law and HOA overreach. I explained everything calmly, methodically. He listened without interruption, nodding as I outlined their trespassing, threats, and blatant attempts to seize control. "Don't worry," he said. "They think confidence equals authority. They think silence means submission. But the law doesn't care about confidence. It cares about facts. And you have them. Every boundary, every deed, every map proves you're right. The moment this goes to court, the truth will speak louder than their threats." That was the turning point. Calm replaced panic. Confidence replaced doubt. I realized I didn't need to fight them on their terms, on intimidation, on harassment, on fear. I could fight them on lawful ground, with evidence, with preparation. For the next several days, I methodically built my case. I organized documents chronologically. I highlighted every instance where the HOA overstepped boundaries. I collected affidavits from suppliers and neighbors who had witnessed intimidation. I created a clear, unbroken narrative: I had rightful ownership, the HOA had no jurisdiction, and their actions were deliberate attempts to intimidate and control. I reviewed the evidence repeatedly. Each time I did, my confidence grew. I could almost see the courtroom, the judge flipping through the files, and the HOA president realizing their confidence wouldn't save them here. Every threat they had thrown at me now had a counterweight, a legal record proving they had crossed the line. By the end of the week, I wasn't just prepared. I was ready. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with undeniable truth. Silence had become my strategy. Evidence had become my weapon. And confidence, quiet, unshakable confidence, had become my armor. The storm was coming. But when it arrived, I would meet it not with fear, but with the law firmly on my side. The morning of the court hearing, I walked into the building feeling a strange mix of calm and anticipation. Outside, the HOA team strutted in like they already owned the courtroom. The president, perfectly groomed and confident, carried herself as if the judge was just another neighbor she could intimidate. Behind her, lawyers in tailored suits shuffled documents, exuding certainty. They expected an easy victory. I, on the other hand, carried nothing but my meticulously organized files and a quiet resolve. Years of ownership, documentation, and legal preparation rested in my hands. Every map, deed, and permit was a weapon of truth, ready to cut through their arrogance. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He looked over the parties with a sharp gaze, and in that instant, I felt the tension in the air snap. This was it. The truth would finally speak. The HOA president began first, her voice dripping confidence. "Your Honor, this vineyard is in violation of community regulations," she stated, pointing to a series of highlighted maps. "We request immediate enforcement and penalties for noncompliance." I handed the judge my evidence. "Your Honor, this property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I have legal deeds, county maps, zoning approvals, and permits proving my vineyard predates the HOA by years. Everything they claim as violations is baseless." The judge took a slow look through the files. Then came the twist no one in that room expected. My lawyer methodically walked the court through the HOA's actions. Security guards trespassing on private land. Vendors being threatened and deliveries blocked. Neighbors being pressured to make false claims. HOA maps that were knowingly altered to include my property within their zone. The room began to shift. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The HOA president's confident smile faltered. The judge raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. "Are you saying this organization knowingly misrepresented boundaries to assert authority over private property?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer replied, calm and precise. "They acted in bad faith, deliberately attempting to intimidate the property owner and seize control unlawfully." The president's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but the judge held up a hand. "This court will review evidence, not theatrics. Let's proceed." As the testimony unfolded, it became impossible to hide the HOA's misconduct. Emails, recordings, and sworn statements from vendors painted a picture of systematic harassment. Every attempt they had made to assert authority over my vineyard was documented. Every lie they had spoken was now laid bare. The president tried to interject multiple times, each interruption met with a calm, firm objection sustained from the judge. The courtroom began to sense the unraveling. People who had laughed at her confidence now watched her falter under the weight of undeniable proof. By the time my lawyer presented the final piece, the official county zoning map confirming my land was not within HOA jurisdiction, the room was silent except for the judge flipping pages. The president slumped slightly in her seat, realizing her authority, so boldly flaunted for months, had no legal foundation whatsoever. Then came the public humiliation moment. The judge, with a firm tone, addressed the HOA directly. "This court finds that the HOA acted in bad faith, knowingly encroaching on private property and attempting to enforce regulations where they hold no jurisdiction. All fines and enforcement attempts are hereby nullified. Further legal action against the property owner will not be tolerated." Gasps filled the room. Whispers spread. The president's confident composure shattered. Lawyers exchanged worried glances. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate me, every smug comment she had made in front of my vineyard, it had crumbled under scrutiny. I sat quietly, letting the room absorb it. The twist was complete, the aggressor, once so confident, exposed in front of everyone. The public had witnessed the truth, and justice had landed hard. Outside the courtroom, neighbors approached, some embarrassed, some apologetic. Vendors who had refused service came back, hesitant but relieved. The HOA president avoided eye contact, knowing that her attempt to control someone else's life had ended in humiliation she couldn't undo. For the first time in months, the weight lifted. Not because the fight was over, but because the truth was finally undeniable, public, and irreversible. This wasn't just a victory for me, it was a lesson for anyone who thought audacity could replace law. The HOA's power, once loud and threatening, had been exposed as nothing more than fragile confidence. And that fragility had been laid bare for everyone to see. The judge's gavel finally fell, reverberating through the courtroom like the sound of a long-overdue truth being shouted into the world. Silence followed, thick and electric, before the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The HOA's confidence, months of intimidation, threats, and harassment, had crumbled completely. The room was no longer theirs to dominate. Every page of my evidence, every testimony, every official document had been accepted as indisputable fact. All fines, penalties, and enforcement attempts issued by the HOA against this property are void, the judge declared. The HOA is prohibited from entering or interfering with the property in question. Any further attempts will result in immediate legal consequences. The words felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Relief washed over me, not the shallow relief of escaping a minor conflict, but the deep, soul-soothing relief of justice vindicated. Every sleepless night, every angry exchange, every moment I'd feared losing my land, all of it had led to this. The HOA president sat frozen, mouth slightly open, her arrogance replaced with shock and disbelief. She had imagined victory in every step, never considering that truth and law could overpower bravado. Around her, her legal team whispered frantically, but it was clear that this was more than a courtroom defeat, it was a public dismantling of the power they had tried to wield over me. Outside the courtroom, the weight of months of harassment lifted completely. Vendors returned, sheepish but relieved, apologizing for hesitating under the HOA's pressure. Neighbors approached cautiously, some offering handshakes, some embarrassed for believing the HOA's lies. I could see their surprise, the same people who had watched the harassment unfold now realizing that truth and courage had the final word. The judge didn't stop there. He awarded damages to cover legal fees, as well as additional compensation for the distress caused by the HOA's harassment. It wasn't just a technical victory. It was a clear message: abuse of power has consequences, and intimidation cannot override property rights. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a quiet pride. Not pride in vengeance, but pride in standing firm, in documenting the truth, and trusting the law even when faced with relentless bullying. The Vineyard waited for me, untouched, resilient, and a testament to years of hard work. It wasn't just land anymore, it was a symbol of standing up to power and winning. I passed the now quiet gate where their SUVs had once roared like predators. The air was different. Lighter. Free. The intimidation that had once clouded the property was gone. I could breathe. I could finally focus on the vineyard, on tending the vines, on life continuing the way it was meant to, without fear, without interference. The HOA president left the premises defeated, humbled in a way no public statement could erase. Her attempts to control, to humiliate, and to dominate had been met with calm, preparation, and unwavering adherence to the law. And now, everyone could see the outcome: audacity without legitimacy has no power. For anyone watching, for anyone who has faced intimidation or threats over something they own or value, this moment proves one thing clearly: knowledge, preparation, and the courage to stand firm can defeat even the most arrogant attempts at control. The truth doesn't just surface, it can explode into public view, exposing deception, forcing accountability, and restoring justice where it was stolen. As I stood at the gate, looking over the vineyard bathed in the afternoon sun, a deep sense of relief and victory settled in. My land was safe. My work was honored. And the HOA's false authority had been shattered for everyone to witness. This was more than just a personal triumph. It was a message: no matter how loud or confident someone tries to be, they cannot override the law, and they cannot erase what is rightfully yours. The battle had ended. Justice had been served. And for the first time in months, I felt truly free. The vineyard was finally quiet again. The chaos imposed by the HOA had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the gentle rustle of vines in the wind. I walked through the rows, touching the leaves, feeling the soil, and tasting the freedom that had been fought for so fiercely. Months of tension, threats, and intimidation were behind me. Neighbors who had been unsure, hesitant, or misled now approached with apologies and respect. Vendors returned without fear. Life resumed its natural rhythm, proving that resilience and patience could restore balance even after a storm of injustice. Standing at the edge of my property, I reflected on the lessons this battle had taught me. Power can be loud and threatening, but it is fragile when confronted with truth, evidence, and calm determination. Fear only has the power we give it. Preparation, patience, and the courage to stand firm are stronger than any false authority. My vineyard, once threatened, now stood as a symbol, not just of hard work, but of justice prevailing. And for anyone who faces intimidation, the message is clear: defend what is yours, trust in the law, and never let audacity replace accountability. Peace comes to those who refuse to bow to injustice.